Welcome to the Social Business Engine podcast, where today's thought leaders discuss how they're using the latest social media strategies and technologies in marketing, sales, customer service, and HR. Get ready to be inspired as our guests contribute to your digital transformation through their stories, knowledge, and insights into what works in today's digitally connected world. And now, here's Bernie Borges, your host of the Social Business Engine podcast.
Hey there, welcome to episode 230. This is Bernie Borges, CMO of Ingresso and host of the Social Business Engine podcast. Hey, thanks for listening. Hey, my guest on this episode is Tamara Schenk, Research Director at CSO Insights, the research division of Miller Heiman Group. Tamara is focused on global research on all things sales enablement, customer experience, and sales effectiveness. She is, together with Miller Heiman Group CEO Byron Matthews, the co-author of the book Sales Enablement, a Master Framework to Engage, Equip, and Empower a World-Class Sales Force. Now, Tamara applies her 25 years of experience in sales, business development, and consulting in different industries to her research role, and she previously developed sales enablement from an idea to a program and a strategic function at T-Systems, which is a Deutsche Telekom company, where she led the global Salesforce enablement and transformation team. Now, on this episode, we discussed the influential role of content in sales enablement, as well as the evolving role of sales enablement in the modern sales organization. Now, this episode is sponsored by Conversica, AI software for marketing and sales that fosters real conversations to discover the most qualified sales opportunities. You'll hear more about Conversica during the mid-roll message. Now, let's get to my conversation with Tamara Schenk, Research Director at CSO Insights. Tamara, welcome to the Social Business Engine podcast.
Thanks for having me, Bernie. Really excited to have an exciting conversation with you about this.
Yeah, we've been planning this for a little while, so here we are. I've been looking forward to it. And where I'd like to begin our conversation, Tamara, is what do you do as Research Director at CSO Insights? What exactly does that mean? And feel free to give us a little more information on CSO Insights as well.
Yeah, happy to do that. CSO Insights is the research division of Miller Heiman Group. So what we do in terms of researching the sales space is independent. What we do, and we have different client groups we work with. So there are what we call end user clients. So people in a sales leadership role who want to challenge and discuss topics and challenges they're going through, and of course, leverage our data, research, and frameworks. Then we work with vendor clients. These are organizations who want to work with us, with our data, with our research to drive their demand and lead generation. And then, of course, the Miller Heiman Group is also a customer of ours. This is whom we serve in that role. So what is my role? There are actually three parts to the role of a research director. One is, of course, designing and creating studies. That means developing surveys to define the research areas. You want to do research on the creating surveys and studies, prepare them, and then you have a recruiting phase where you leverage all the variety of different channels to get the defined roles to participate in a study. Then it's a lot about analyzing data and understanding what's the story the data tells us. And then it's a lot about writing. It's about writing reports, of course. It's also about writing blog posts and white papers and case studies and member research assets that are a bit deeper and share more how to do it and only what to do. And then, of course, it's working with clients and it's speaking about what we are doing. So this is done when I speak at a conference, for instance.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, you have co-authored a book along with Byron Matthews, the CEO of Miller Heiman Group, who was a guest on actually Vengresso's other podcast, Selling with Social, hosted by Vengresso CEO Mario Martinez Jr. And in fact, Byron was on his podcast twice because they had such an invigorating conversation. So in our conversation, I really want to drill down on the role of sales enablement and what that means in the way of customer engagement. So let's begin, Tamara, with your definition, your worldview of the role of sales enablement in modern sales.
The role of sales enablement, it is a strategic cross-functional discipline. It has the goal to increase predictable sales results by providing scalable enablement services, if that's training, content, or coaching or tools for customer-facing professionals and their managers so that they can be relevant and valuable and differentiating in every buyer interaction. That's how we define sales enablement. And of course, I'm now for 4 years in this role of an analyst. So in my past, I had many different sales roles in different industries, also consulting roles, business development roles. And before I joined CSO Insights, I had the pleasure to develop sales enablement from an idea to a program, to a function, to a strategic function. And now I have the pleasure to look at it from a research perspective. So I know both worlds and I know all the challenges enablement leaders are running into to make this really effective.
So in other words, you have the real world experience before becoming a research director where you're writing about it and speaking on a topic and publishing books on the topic. You've actually done it.
Yes.
Fantastic. What is the role then of customer engagement? When we think of customer engagement in the context of sales, we think of salespeople engaging with customers. But in your research and in your content that you publish, you've really provided some interesting perspective on the role of customer engagement and who's responsible for it. And, what are the issues around it? Is it tied to enablement? Is it tied to social selling? So you want to just comment on that whole topic of the role of customer engagement?
Absolutely. So it's coming up more and more as a challenge, not only for enablement leaders, for sales leaders, also for service leaders, and also for marketing professionals. And for me, where it comes together is the idea we are always trying to focus on in sales enablement that our primary design point has to be the customer. And in detail, it means the customer's path or customer's journey, whatever works better for you. And that is something that covers the buyer's awareness phase, the customer's awareness phase, the buying phase, and also the implementation and usage phase together. And so customer engagement or buyer engagement actually means how we as an organization and we as customer-facing professionals get in touch with buyers and customers along their entire customer's path. So it's actually something we want to enable with sales enablement, that the customer-facing professional can actually do this, that they can be valuable, relevant, and differentiating in every interaction. So it is something enablement should prepare and should enable and should work on to improve customer engagement, but it's not only a sales enablement task, and I cannot say, oh, they take care of it and then it's done. It's definitely something different functions that work along the customer's path should collaborate on.
I actually heard Byron Matthews say something, and we've borrowed this and we've fully attributed to him. And who knows, Tamara, maybe he got it from you. What I've heard him say is that the modern buyer has become better at buying faster than the seller has become at selling. And if I kind of extrapolate what you just said around the customer engagement, isn't that the core issue that we're dealing with? That in order for sales teams to engage with the customer, they have to be able to meet that buyer where that buyer is, and meet the needs of that buyer, because that buyer's become better at buying.
He's totally right on this, and one of the core headlines he's opening his speeches up with, and it's really spot on, and it's really summarizing this together. It's actually the need for sales enablement to be a more strategic function to really focus on what's going on at the customer's path, that we can respond to this in a useful way. And we see it also in the buyer study we have done, that buyers have a very clear understanding of what they want, when they want to engage with salespeople, how they want to engage with salespeople. And we also learned that they would actually be willing to engage with sellers more often, but there are reasons why they don't do it more often. So yeah, that covers a lot. And it's just really pointing out the need for getting better at customer engagement.
Yeah. That leads me in our conversation to where I'd like to go next on this topic. And that is in terms of that customer engagement process and that journey, the role of content. We talk about that a lot at Ingresso. We call it content sales or sales enablement. And I know, you share that sentiment. I've remarked on numerous blog posts that you've written on this topic. So I'd really love for you to share with my listener your perspective, the role of content in sales and customer engagement.
Content plays a crucial role when it comes to sales enablement success, customer engagement success, and ultimately customer experience success. So content is not only the foundation of every single training service as well. Content is just what I need at all the different stages of the customer's path to engage with buyers in a meaningful way. And it always makes sense to define content a little bit more in detail, because for some people, it's just what's on the website. For others, it's a playbook. And we usually categorize it in, hey, there is customer-facing content, something a seller is using in an interaction with a group of buyers or with a buyer. There is customer-facing content that's available online where I can download things, I can read a blog post, I can watch a video, I can listen to a podcast. Things. And then there is also internal enablement content. Maybe enablement team has created a playbook that guides a salesperson along the customer's path with different links and different information about industry and buyer role and all these things. It can also happen that there is a battle card, a competitive comparison guide, or that there is an objection handling guide or something like that, or solution configuration tools or pricing tools or value justification tools. We're all pieces of enablement services, specifically content services. And then what's very often overlooked, and I've written about this, I think last week or 2 weeks ago, is there are pieces of content that are very often not seen as content. There's a proposal template. There is a contract template I need. There is a statement of work template I need just to close a deal. It's really at the very end of a buying phase. And very often salespeople are stopped by that because the right attachment is not available, or for this process, you cannot take this contract attachment or something like that. So this is also content. It really means I have to make sure that, and that's really an enablement's orchestrating role to ensure that customer-facing professionals have all these different content assets they need for different purposes available to them. And this comes down to, do we have a content strategy in the organization? And it's not only having content marketing strategy for brand awareness, demand, and lead gen, it's also having this content strategy that covers the rest of the customer's path, which is something usually enablement should orchestrate on. And as we learned in our recent survey, only 1/3 of organizations have such a content strategy in place.
Okay. And I remember, let's see if I have that note in front of me, that about 1/3 of them, it actually comes from marketing. Is that right?
Yeah. So that's another interesting data point, is the question, where does content come from? And most people have this immediate reaction, okay, content is marketing, it comes from marketing. And then we talk about marketing content, and then we're really missing the point, because content comes in different forms and shapes and from different functions, and we just have to orchestrate this big puzzle. So yes, last year it was 39% of the content salespeople need to close business came from marketing. This year is 33%. We still have around 20% of content salespeople have to create from scratch. This is not what we want. We want them probably to customize and tailor content to different buying situations, buyer roles, and so, but not creating from scratch. And then we have around 15% of content comes from product management and from sales enablement, so especially playbooks and guidelines, things like that. And then sales operations and legal, they also contribute some pieces of content. So if you look at this bigger picture, there is definitely a need, and ideally a sales enablement function takes care of it, that it has to be orchestrated, and I need to have a strategy, and I need to define the different situations I want to use content, which comes down to what is the purpose of a specific piece of content.
Okay.
And that's what should be covered in a content strategy, basically.
Exactly. Well, you make an excellent point, because we run into that all the time. And my own background is content marketing. And the difference between content marketing and content that's used for sales in the customer journey, oftentimes that's not even acknowledged or understood in many organizations.
Yeah.
So as you pointed out, only about 1/3 of companies actually are even doing this. Now, if I'm not mistaken, you're the one with the data points, so please keep me honest here, Tamara, but I think the win rates are higher for those companies that are actually doing it. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. So good that you remind me. I'm talking about the impact of it. Yeah, having a content strategy drives performance. So it impacts performance in two ways. And one is a direct way, and that means organizations, this 1/3 that said we have a content strategy in place, They have much better win rates for forecast deals, around 55.5%. That's a pretty okay win rate compared to the disagree group. And they had only a win rate of 43.3%. And that is not good. So if I recall this correctly, then gambling in Vegas would be more successful than having a win rate of 43.3%.
Yeah.
So it really tells a story. It makes sense to really organize and structure the whole content space, to having a content strategy and also to have a creation management process in place, not only to enable customer engagement, also to achieve another goal. And that's interesting. And I think I will write about this week. And this is that content also drives the level of relationships.
Mm-hmm.
So we are looking at this for a couple of years now, and it becomes clearer and clearer every year that the quality of your content really helps you to evolve customer relationship levels.
And is that because it builds more credibility?
Yeah, early on, it builds more credibility and it supports the customer engagement approach. So your customer engagement approach is being valuable, relevant, and differentiating in every single buyer interaction, in every single customer interaction. Then if the content supports that strategy, it just creates a consistent perception. And that's just positive in terms of the relationship levels organizations want to achieve. And then customer engagement is perceived more positive, and then the customer experience is better where we want to get to.
Right, right. Now, I've also seen in some of your writing, Tamara, the notion that salespeople need to also learn how to effectively use content and build it into their messaging. We can't just assume that because the content is available that they know how to use it, when to use it, etc. So what are you seeing there?
That's a great point, and that's very often overlooked. So I'm usually saying no content without training and no training without content. So the latter makes sense for everybody, but no content without training, people say, oh, what? And what we mean with that is just because an enablement team creates a new shiny object, maybe a great new playbook, and if they just provide it, it doesn't mean that sales professionals know how to use it effectively. And what we usually recommend is don't overdo it, but work with a group of highly successful sales professionals and let them record a short video, 1 or 2 minutes, how to use this asset and why it's useful in different buying situations. It's much more powerful than having somebody from the enablement team telling the sales force why this is great. Of course it is. But if somebody from the sales force is doing that, it's much more powerful. It doesn't have to be overly complicated, but just helping sales little, hey, this is a playbook. This is how you use it. Just go here and click there and use it this way. And it will reduce your preparation time and will help you to be more effective. Things like that. Because, all of us have had sales roles in the past and we have so much pressure. And if something is not working out within 2 minutes, we just, we walk away from it and we use what we know what worked last week. And that's just a challenge we have to overcome. And as we know how salespeople deal with those challenges, it's just easy to provide, them the right tools to help them out and to show them how to use it.
And I know that you also talk a lot about aligning sales enablement services to the customer's path. We've been talking about that all along, but when it comes to the content itself, sometimes, I don't know about you, I can't speak for you, but sometimes we take for granted sort of the logic behind aligning content with the customer's journey, right? Their path, the buyer roles, and their business challenges. But you just said a moment ago that salespeople need training on that, right? Maybe you can kind of reinforce that, or there's another perspective that you want to share on the importance of aligning content with the customer path and the buyer's journey.
Yeah, of course, it begins with content design and content creation so that we have a clear understanding what's the purpose of this piece of content we're going to create and what's the selling challenges it should support and what's the buying perspective it should provide answers to. And what we see in our data is that 42% of organizations said, yes, we fully agree, we align our enablement services to the customer's path to drive customer engagement and experience. And now if you look at it, because this is not a bad number, 42% say we do this, okay, it's not a bad number. But if you drill that down, then when we ask the more specific questions, okay, how do you do this? Do you align your content to the different buyer roles, their challenges and outcomes? Only 24% say, yeah, this is what we do. And if you say, okay, do you tailor your content to industries? Do you focus on different value messages for the different customer journey phases? And all of these more detailed questions, we only saw 23 to 25% of organizations say, yes, this is what we do. So what we see in the data is that the perception, we were aligned in what we're doing is at 42%. If it comes down to the details, we're actually not so aligned at the moment. And if we go through all these data points, we see for every single one that the outcomes in terms of win rates are better in the agree group than in the disagree group. And usually the disagree group is below the average win rate or quota attainment rate. So also here it really makes sense. There is a strong case for the need to do it. Yeah.
And when you say agree group in this context means that they agree that they're aligning their enablement services to the customer experience, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's for aligning the content along the customer's path to different buyer roles, to their challenges. They align the value messages to the different customer journey phrase and all these things. Yeah.
Okay. Terrific. We'll be back in a moment with my conversation with Tamara. Your salespeople want to spend all their time talking with prospects who are interested in your products and services. Imagine if you had a sales development rep sending friendly and personable email messages crafted in response to a lead's initial inquiry. Emails that are sent in a friendly and conversational style that don't include unnecessary graphics or links. This sales development rep never sleeps or gets sick. Conversica is AI-powered sales conversion management software that functions as a sales development rep who helps confirm phone numbers from leads and confirms their interest in talking with your sales rep. Imagine finding hot leads among the hundreds or thousands of inbound leads that you create. Send your sales reps only leads from people who say, yes, I want to talk with a rep. Learn more at conversica.com. Last question before I segue to a summary. What about pitfalls? What are some of the pitfalls that you've seen that really can be avoided for companies that are really focused on this customer engagement strategy through sales enablement?
Yeah, pitfall number one is, and Bernie, you mentioned this a few minutes ago, is that what works in marketing does not necessarily work in sales, which is because of the marketing purposes. You talk to a group, your approach is macro. Yeah, you want to attract a target audience, and that's usually a defined target audience group. Whereas, and this is a macro perspective, whereas sales, I'm always in a micro perspective. I'm in a specific selling situation. I have a buying challenge to work on, and this is at a certain stage along the customer's path. It is more a micro view. So what a market message is not necessarily a sales message. So, and also this is the reason why it makes a lot of sense to have a sales enablement team orchestrating these things, to make sure that there is the same understanding of, okay, it's totally fine. We need marketing messages here, but we should have sales value messages over there, and they should be different in the different customer path phases. That's one part of it, and this is a strategy and design implementation thing. And the other thing that's often overlooked is that we also mentioned that salespeople needs training. So if I look back to my past, I come from the IT industry. So a couple of years ago, you talked to the CIO all the time. So you talked about data services, data center, all these different things, to IT people, to CIO kind of roles. And then all of a sudden, everything was in the cloud and the buyer roles changed. All of a sudden, CFO roles came into the play, and they had totally different questions, which means I need a totally different conversation. I need to answer a question around the business case. How would this investment connect to my EBIT program? And it's a very, very different conversation. And of course, if you're not used to it, you feel uncomfortable and you avoid the conversation, which is natural. So it really means value messaging for different buyer roles. We need training on this, and we also need coaching on that to make it happen. It's just not enough to provide the messaging and say, here it is, so take it and walk away with it. It's not working. Really needs training and coaching there.
So I want to sneak in one more question. And that is what you're seeing in the role of sales enablement from an organizational structure standpoint. Is it typically a function that you see sitting in sales, sitting in marketing, as dotted lines, or is it solid lines, into both functions? What are you seeing by and large across many organizations?
That's a great question. And what we've seen in our 2018 study is that the majority of organizations have sales enablement report to the sales leader. That can be the VP of sales, it can be the chief revenue officer or the chief sales officer. We have still around 20% of enablement teams that report into sales operations. And this is something that's more relevant the larger the organization is. And here it really matters if you have a very strategically oriented sales operations team, it makes sense or not. What you usually have in larger organizations. And then interestingly, there is also an emerging group of organizations that have their enablement function report to the CEO or to the COO.
Really?
And this is especially in high performing organizations of different sizes, but if they have a quota attainment of 80% or more and a strong growth agenda, then enablement is often perceived to be the engine to help driving this. It's what we observed this year. But overall, just around, I think it's between 55 and 60% report to the sales leader.
Wow. Okay. Fantastic. Clearly, you and Byron Matthews have written a book on this topic, so we can talk for hours just on the topic of sales enablement alone. But we're at a point in this episode, Tamara, where I'm going to do my summary, and then I'm going to ask you to either fill in any holes for my summary, or if I jog your memory on a point you want to cover. And then after that, we'll ask you to give some contact information, and we'll bring this episode to a wrap.
Excellent.
So we began our conversation with a little introduction to CSO Insights. You are the research division of Miller Heiman Group. You do independent research and serve multiple clients providing independent research, and that you're doing things like designing studies and analyzing the data, and then, of course, writing reports and case studies and lots of blog posts to really share that content with the world. And of course, it's all about really the role of sales enablement in modern sales. And you mentioned that it's a strategic cross-functional discipline. It's really intended to increase predictable sales results. It includes things like training and content and tools, and it really impacts more than just a sales organization. It also impacts other organizations like marketing, customer service, and just, depending on the industry, can impact many different organizations within the company. And then you mentioned that in many cases, it's reporting about half the time it's reporting into the sales leader, sometimes into marketing, and then in some organizations, really even into the C-suite. So that's very, very interesting. And then we talked about the role of customer engagement and what's involved there and how that really impacts sales reps, of course, sales leaders, marketing leaders, executives, and really the focus is the customer journey, understanding the customer journey. How do we get in touch with buyers along their path when buyers are really in control and they can go along their path almost 60, 70, 80% of the way, depending on how far they want to go. And we mentioned that, buyers have become better at buying faster than sellers have become at selling. And again, that quote from Byron Matthews. And you've documented that in many buyer studies, and buyers know when they want to engage with salespeople and how they want to engage with salespeople. And we talked about the role of content in customer engagement. It's a crucial role. It's needed at every stage of the customer's journey. You pointed out that there's different types of content. There's customer-facing or public-facing content, things like website content and anything that's just public domain. But there's also internal enablement content, and that can be things like playbooks, competitive guides, objection handling, templates, etc. And then, of course, a company needs a content strategy. And there's a difference between, and boy, we talk about this a lot, a difference between content marketing strategy, which is generally very brand-centric, top-of-the-funnel centric, and content for sales. We call it content for sales or content for sales enablement to really impact the customer journey. And you mentioned from your research that only about 1/3 of organizations are actually doing content for sales enablement. And about 1/3 of that is coming from marketing. 20% is coming from the salespeople themselves, which is not great use of their time. And about 15% coming from product management. I don't think I captured all the percentages in terms of where they're coming from, but that kind of hits the treetops on it. And the bottom line is content used in sales can impact performance. Companies that are doing it have a higher win rate. If I got the number correct, 55% win rates versus those that are not doing it have a 43% win rate. So pretty significant difference there. The other point that you mentioned is that companies that produce content for sales enablement are also driving relationships, stronger relationships from that content. But we also talked about the fact that salespeople need to learn how to use content effectively. I love your point, no content without training and no training without content. We just can't assume that salespeople know how to use content. And you can do things like have successful salespeople who know how to use it, record short videos, and so salespeople can learn from their peers. And then we talked about some of the pitfalls or risks associated with the customer engagement process. You mentioned that, what marketing does is not exactly the same as sales because it's very macro focused, whereas sales is more micro focused. They're focused on accounts. They're focused on buyer personas or maybe specific industries. And so therefore, again, the role of content and customer engagement needs to be different and needs to be approached differently at each level. And then we talked about the fact that salespeople just need training and they need to understand the shifting buyer roles within an industry. And again, need to understand the different value messaging that's associated with different types of content. So Tamara, those are my summary points. Is there anything that you would like to add?
It's perfectly covered. Excellent.
Fantastic. All right. Well, before we sign off here, I'd like to ask you to share a couple things. One is, where can people connect with you online to learn more about what you've got going on at CSO Insights, and also the name of your book so that we can also put a link to that in the show notes.
Happy to do so. Yeah, so the best way to get in touch with me is via LinkedIn. So just please send me a message or a connection request. Happy to do that. Or via Twitter at Tamara Schenk. And of course, on our website on csoinsights.com. So we have blog posts each Tuesday and each Thursday. And our recent studies can be downloaded on csoinsights.com. And yes, our book, Byron Matthews and I co-author, it's called Sales Enablement, a master framework to engage, equip, and empower a world-class sales force, is available at Amazon.
Fantastic. Well, Tamara, you know that I'm a big fan of all the content that you produce. That's how we got here on this podcast. So I want to thank you for joining me today on this episode of the Social Business Engine podcast. I look forward to continuing to engage with you and consume more of your content and learn from it. So thank you so much, Tamara.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a great pleasure. I really enjoyed our conversation. Thanks, Bernie.
Well, I hope that you enjoyed my conversation with Tamara Schenk, Research Director at CSO Insights. My big takeaway from this conversation with Tamara is that the sales enablement role is critical to the success of the modern sales organization. Essentially, it's the bridge between marketing, sales, and the C-suite. The sales enablement role can be a valuable resource to sales leadership, sales reps, and also the conduit from marketing to implement content for sales enablement programs to feed the right content for the right situations for salespeople to use to help them create more sales conversations. I also want to encourage you to read the blog posts that are mentioned in this episode. These posts offer a lot of insights and a lot of data to support Tamara's statement that sales organizations who deliver content, relevant content to their sales teams, win more. And winning is what sales teams want. So hey, what was your takeaway from my conversation with Tamara Schenk, Research Director at CSO Insights? Hey, I want to remind you that this episode is sponsored by Conversica, AI software for marketing and sales that fosters real conversations to discover the most qualified sales opportunities. Learn more at conversica.com. And of course, we'll link that up in the show notes page for this episode at vengresso.com. And hey, while you're there on our website, be sure to get subscribed, if you're not, to both this podcast, the Social Business Engine podcast, and also our Selling with Social podcast, hosted by Vengresso CEO Mario Martinez Jr. And if you're not already following our podcast on social media, certainly check that out. We are at GoVengresso on Twitter, and on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram, we're just plain old Vengresso. And as for me, I am at Bernie Borges on pretty much all the social media channels that I spend time on, which are mostly LinkedIn, Twitter, and Instagram. Hey, that is a wrap for episode 230. I want to thank my guest once again, Tamara Schenk, Research Director at CSO Insights. This is Bernie Borges, CMO of Vengresso, signing off for now and wishing you continued success on your social business journey.
Thank you for listening to the Social Business Engine podcast. Be sure to tune in again next week to reconnect with Bernie Borges for more insights, inspiration, and practical advice on social business. Visit socialbusinessengine.com to catch even more content on social strategy that will rock your business and your career.